Sometimes the most beautiful dreams become the most painful nightmares. This is Albert's story, a cautionary tale that will change how you see love forever. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. The plane touched. Down in Manila at 11:47 p.m., Albert stepped into the humid night air, his weathered hands gripping a single black suitcase. At 59, he thought he'd seen it all. 25 years as a construction foreman in Michigan, a bitter divorce that took half his pension. Kids who barely called anymore, but standing there in Ninoy Aquino International Airport, surrounded by foreign voices and unfamiliar faces, Albert felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: hope. This is it, he whispered to himself. Fresh start. The taxi driver spoke broken English, but his smile was genuine. As they drove through the neon-lit streets of Manila, Albert pressed his face to the window. Street vendors selling barbecue at midnight, families on motorcycles, 3 people deep, children playing in narrow alleys despite the late hour. Everything felt alive here. Back in Detroit, his apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Here life pulsed through every corner. Albert had done his research. 3 months of chatting with Filipino women online, sweet messages, video calls, promises of finding real love. But one woman stood out from the rest. Her name was Maya. 30 years old, nursing student from Quezon City. Big brown eyes that sparkled even through his laptop screen. She never asked about money like the others. She asked about his dreams, his favorite foods, what made him laugh. "I can't wait to meet you," she had typed just before he boarded the plane. "I have a good feeling about us." Albert smiled, remembering those words as the taxi pulled up to his hotel in Makati. Tomorrow he would finally meet Maya in person. Tomorrow his real life would begin. But if Albert had known what was waiting for him in the coming months, he might have turned around and caught the next flight home. The shopping mall buzzed with afternoon energy. Albert sat at a table in the food court, checking his watch for the 10th time. Maya was 15 minutes late. His palms were sweating despite the air conditioning. Then he saw her. She moved through the crowd like she owned the place. Long black, hair flowing behind her shoulders, wearing a simple blue dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a magazine. When she spotted Albert, her face lit up with a smile that made his heart skip. "Albert!" she called out, practically running toward him. She threw her arms around him in a hug that felt like coming home. She smelled like jasmine and vanilla. For a moment, Albert forgot about his age, his gray hair, his expanding waistline. "You're even more handsome in person," Maya said, pulling back to look at him. "The camera doesn't do you justice." Albert blushed like a teenager. "You're the beautiful one here. I still can't believe you wanted to meet me." They talked for hours. Maya told him about growing up in a small province with 6 siblings, how her father died when she was 12, leaving her mother to raise them alone. How she was working 3 jobs to pay for nursing school. "I want to help people," she said, her eyes shining with sincerity. "But it's hard here. Everything costs so much, and the pay is so low." Albert found himself opening up too, about his lonely nights in Michigan, about how American women his age seemed bitter, focused only on what he could provide, about how tired he was of feeling invisible. "You're not invisible to me," Maya said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "I see you, Albert, the real you." That night she showed him around Manila. They rode jeepneys through the crowded streets. She introduced him to her favorite barbecue stand, laughing as he struggled with the spicy sauce. She took selfies with him at Rizal Park, acting like he was some celebrity she was proud to be seen with. "My friends won't believe I'm dating a handsome American," she giggled, scrolling through the photos on her phone. Albert felt something he hadn't felt in years: wanted, needed, alive. Over the next 2 weeks, they were inseparable. Maya would pick him up from his hotel every morning, full of energy and plans for the day. They visited Intramuros, took boat rides in Manila Bay, explored the narrow streets of Chinatown. But it was the quiet moments that got to Albert the most. The way she would lean against him when they watched the sunset, how she would hold his hand while they walked, like she was afraid he might disappear. "I've never felt this way before," she whispered one night as they sat on the hotel balcony. Is it crazy that I'm already thinking about forever? Albert's heart pounded. No, he said, it's not crazy at all. And in that moment, looking into Maya's eyes with the lights of Manila twinkling below them, Albert made a decision that would change everything. But some decisions, no matter how right they feel in the moment, carry consequences we never see coming. 3 months later, Albert was living in a rented condo in Quezon City. The place wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. Maya had practically moved in, bringing her clothes, her textbooks, her dreams of becoming a nurse. Life felt like a dream. They would wake up together, share breakfast on the small balcony overlooking the busy street below. Maya would go to her classes while Albert explored the city or video called his buddies back home, bragging about his beautiful girlfriend. You lucky dog, his friend Dave would say. She's gorgeous, and she actually seems to care about you. That was the thing about Maya. She did seem to care. She would text him throughout the day. Have you eaten? Don't forget your medicine. I miss you already. She would massage his shoulders when he complained about back pain. She would listen to his stories about construction work like they were the most fascinating things she'd ever heard. But slowly, Albert started noticing things. Maya's phone was always face down when they were together. She would excuse herself to take calls, speaking in rapid Tagalog, before returning with explanations that seemed rehearsed. Just my sister, she would say. Family drama, you know? Her nursing school. Schedule became erratic. Some days she had classes from morning to night. Other days she was mysteriously free for hours at a time. The professors are always changing things, she explained, when Albert asked about it. It's so disorganized here. Then there were the money conversations. They started small, casual. Pensions of tuition fees, family emergencies, unexpected expenses. My mother is sick, Maya said one evening, her eyes filling with tears. She needs medicine, but it's so expensive, I don't know what to do. Albert's heart broke seeing her distress. How much? He asked. No, I can't ask you for money, Maya protested, but she mentioned the amount anyway. It wasn't huge by American standards, but Albert could see it meant the world to her. He gave her the money without hesitation. Her gratitude was overwhelming. Tears, kisses, promises that she would pay him back as soon as she graduated and found work. But the requests became more frequent, more urgent, more expensive. A classmate was getting married, and Maya needed a nice dress for the wedding. Her laptop broke and she needed it for school. Her nephew was in the hospital. Albert found himself saying yes every time, not because he was naive, he wasn't stupid, but because the alternative was too painful to consider. If Maya was using him for money, then what did that make their relationship? What did that make him? So he pushed the doubts away, made excuses, told himself that in a poor country, financial emergencies were just part of life. But late at night, when Maya was asleep beside him, Albert would stare at the ceiling and wonder, how much of this was real? How much of Maya's love was genuine, and how much was just really good acting? The answer was coming sooner than he thought. 6 months in the Philippines had transformed Albert. He'd lost weight, picked up some Tagalog phrases, and felt more energetic than he had in years. Maya was the reason for all of it. She had introduced him to her family, her mother, her siblings, her aunts and uncles. They welcomed him like he'd always been part of their clan. Family dinners where everyone fought to put food on his plate. Children who climbed onto his lap and called him Tito Albert. For the first time in his adult life, Albert felt like he belonged somewhere. You make Maya so happy, her mother told him one Sunday after dinner. I can see it in her eyes, she loves you very much. That night, as they walked along Roxas Boulevard, watching couples take selfies against the Manila Bay, sunset, Maya brought up the future again. Albert, she said quietly, do you ever think about getting married? His heart stopped. Every day, he admitted. I mean, to me. Do you think about marrying me? Albert stopped walking. He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. Maya, I think about it all the time. I think about building a life with you, having a family, growing old together. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Really? Really? I love you, Maya. More than I've ever loved anyone. She kissed him right there on the busy sidewalk, not caring who was watching. "I love you too, Albert, so much." 2 weeks later, Albert was down on one knee in the middle of Luneta Park. Maya gasped when she saw the ring. Nothing fancy, but it sparkled in the afternoon sun. "Maya Santos," Albert said, his voice shaking. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she screamed, loud enough for half the park to hear. "Yes, yes, yes." The crowd around them applauded. Strangers took photos. Maya was crying and laughing at the same time, showing off her ring to anyone who would look. They got married 3 months later. Small ceremony in a beautiful church in Quezon City. Maya looked like an angel in her simple white dress. Albert wore a barong Tagalog that made him feel like he finally belonged in this country. Maya's family filled most of the church. Albert's side was nearly empty. Just 2 expat friends he'd met at a bar in Makati. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the woman beside him, promising to love him for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. "I'm the luckiest man alive," Albert whispered as they shared their first dance. "And I'm the luckiest woman," Maya whispered back. But luck, Albert would soon learn, can change faster than the weather in Manila. And sometimes the person promising to love you forever is the same person planning to destroy you. Marriage changed everything, but not in the ways Albert expected. Maya quit nursing school the month after their wedding. "I don't need to work now," she said with a smile. "I have you to take care of me." Albert wasn't sure how he felt about that, but he didn't want to seem controlling. If Maya wanted to focus on being a wife, who was he to argue? Then came the business proposal. "Albert, honey," Maya said one morning over breakfast, "I have an idea. What if we started our own business?" She had it all planned out. A small restaurant in Quezon City, serving traditional Filipino food to locals and foreigners. She had already found the perfect location, talked to suppliers, even designed a simple menu. "I could run it during the day while you relax," she said excitedly. "It would give us steady income, and I'd feel useful again. What do you think?" Albert loved seeing her passionate about something. "How much would we need to start?" Maya pulled out a notebook filled with calculations. Rent, equipment, initial inventory, permits, employee salaries. The total made Albert's eyes widen, but it wasn't impossible. He had his pension, some savings, the money from selling his house in Michigan. "It's a lot," he said carefully. "I know. But Albert, this could be our future, our independence. We wouldn't have to worry about money anymore." She showed him photos of the location on her phone. A small storefront on a busy street, perfect foot traffic, reasonable rent. It actually looked promising. "Okay," Albert said finally. "Let's do it." Maya's squeal of excitement could have woken the neighbors. She threw her arms around him, covering his face with kisses. "You won't regret this, I promise. We're going to be so successful." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork and bank transfers. Since foreigners couldn't own businesses outright in the Philippines, everything had to be registered under Maya's name. Albert signed document after document, trusting his wife to handle the details. "It's just a formality," Maya assured him. "You're still the real owner. I'm just the face on the papers." Albert transferred $45,000 from his American bank account to their joint account in Manila. It was most of his remaining savings, but Maya was right. This was their future. The restaurant opened 6 weeks later. Maya's kitchen, with a bright red sign and the smell of adobo drifting onto the street. Maya hired her cousin to help with cooking and her friend's daughter to serve customers. For the first few days, Albert would stop by to check on things. Maya was always busy, always cheerful, always full of stories about the customers she'd met. "Business is picking up," she would tell him. "Word is spreading. Give it a few more weeks and we'll be making real money." But after the first month, Maya started discouraging his visits. "Honey, you don't need to come by so much," she said. "You're retired. You should be relaxing, not worrying about the restaurant. I've got everything under control." Albert respected her independence. She was his wife, his business partner. If she said everything was fine, then everything was fine. But sometimes, late at night, when Maya thought he was asleep, Albert would hear her on the phone. Hushed conversations in Tagalog, punctuated by nervous laughter. When he asked who was calling so late, Maya would smile and say, Just supplier problems, nothing for you to worry about. Albert wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her because if Maya was lying about the business, what else might she be lying about? Albert woke up at 3 a.m. to an empty bed. Maya's side was cold, like she'd been gone for hours. This was the third time this week. "Maya," he called out, but the condo was silent. He found a note on the kitchen counter. "Emergency at the restaurant. Back soon, love you." Albert made coffee and sat on the balcony, watching the empty streets below. A few jeepneys rumbled past, but most of Manila was asleep. What kind of restaurant emergency happened at 3 a.m.? When Maya finally came home at sunrise, her excuse was ready. "The freezer broke down. I had to save all the food before it spoiled. Called some suppliers to take it off our hands. Thank God we didn't lose everything." She looked tired, but not like someone who'd spent the night dealing with a broken freezer. Her makeup was fresh, her clothes were clean. She smelled like expensive perfume, not like the inside of a restaurant. "Maybe I should come help next time," Albert offered. "No need," Maya said quickly. "I handled it. You should get some sleep." That afternoon, while Maya was supposedly at the restaurant, Albert decided to surprise her with lunch. He walked the 6 blocks to Maya's kitchen, carrying a bag of her favorite suman from the market. The restaurant was closed. Not just closed, abandoned. The windows were dark, chairs stacked on tables, a thick layer of dust on everything. A sign on the door said, "For rent," in both English and Tagalog. Albert's heart started pounding. He tried the door, but it was locked. He peered through the windows, but there was nothing inside except empty shelves and a few old flyers scattered on the floor. "Excuse me," he called to the woman selling vegetables from a cart nearby. "How long has this place been closed?" She looked at him with pity. 2 months, sir. Maybe longer. The girl who rented it, she stopped coming. Just disappeared one day." Albert felt like he was going to be sick. 2 months. Maya had been lying to him for 2 months about going to work every day. He stumbled home in a daze when Maya returned. That evening, full of stories about the busy lunch rush and the new customer who loved her pancit, Albert just stared at her. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, kissing his cheek. "Fine," he managed. "How was the restaurant?" "Great. We're really building a regular customer base. I think we'll start seeing real profits soon." Albert nodded and smiled, but inside he was screaming. That night, after Maya fell asleep, Albert did something he never thought he'd do. He went through her phone. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. Messages with someone named Ryan. Hundreds of them. Intimate messages. Photos that made Albert's stomach turn. Plans to meet at hotels. Talk about their future together. Discussions about getting rid of the old man. The most recent message was from earlier that day. "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. Hotel room is ready." Albert read it 3 times before it sank in. While he was discovering the closed restaurant, Maya was planning another night with her boyfriend. He scrolled back through weeks of messages. The timeline became clear. Maya had been seeing Ryan since before their wedding, maybe since before Albert had even arrived in the Philippines. The restaurant had never really opened. Maya had taken his $45,000 and, what? Given it to Ryan? Spent it on hotels and shopping trips? Hidden it somewhere for their future together? Albert set the phone down with shaking hands. He looked at Maya sleeping peacefully beside him, and for the first time since arriving in the Philippines, he saw her clearly. Not as the loving wife he thought he'd married. Not as the struggling nursing student who needed his help, but as a stranger. A beautiful, dangerous stranger who had played him perfectly from day one. The question now was, what was he going to do about it? Albert didn't sleep for the next 3 days. He would lie awake watching Maya sleep, wondering how many of her smiles had been fake, how many I love yous had been lies, how many nights she'd come home from Ryan's bed and kissed Albert goodnight. He hired a private investigator, a Filipino-American ex-cop named Carlos who specialized in cases like this. "You'd be surprised how common this is," Carlos told him during their first meeting. "Foreign men come here looking for love, and some local women see dollar signs. Not all of them, but enough to make it a problem." Carlos worked fast. Within a week, he had photos, hotel receipts, bank records, phone logs. The evidence was overwhelming and heartbreaking. Maya and Ryan had been together for over a year, long before Albert arrived in Manila. They lived together in a condo in Makati that Albert's money had probably paid for. Ryan was unemployed, living off what Maya could extract from Albert. "She's got 3 other foreign boyfriends she's been talking to online," Carlos reported. "Looks like you were just the first one who actually showed up." The worst part was the photos. Maya and Ryan holding hands on the same streets where she'd walked with Albert. Kissing on the same beach where she'd told Albert she loved him. Shopping together with money Albert had given her for emergencies. Albert stared at the evidence spread across his kitchen table. His entire relationship with Maya had been a performance. Every moment of happiness, every promise of forever, all of it had been carefully orchestrated to separate him from his money. When Maya came home that night, humming and cheerful as always, Albert was waiting for her with the photos. "Sit down," he said quietly. Maya saw the pictures and her face went white. For a moment, just a moment, Albert saw something real in her expression. Fear. "Albert, I can explain." "Don't." His voice was calmer than he felt. "Don't lie to me anymore. I know about Ryan. I know about the restaurant that never existed. I know about the other men you're talking to online." Maya's mask slipped completely. The sweet, loving wife disappeared, replaced by someone Albert had never seen before. Someone cold and calculating. "So what?" she said, crossing her arms. "What are you going to do about it?" The question hit Albert like a slap. What was he going to do? He was 59 years old, thousands of miles from home, in a country where he barely understood the laws. Maya was his legal wife. All their joint assets were in her name. "I want a divorce," he said. Maya laughed. Actually laughed. "There's no divorce in the Philippines, Albert. Didn't you do your research before you moved here? The only way out is annulment, and that takes years. Years of lawyers. And court dates and money you don't have anymore." Albert felt the trap closing around him. "The restaurant money." "What restaurant money?" "You gave me that money as a gift. A loving husband supporting his wife's dreams. Good luck proving otherwise." She stood up, suddenly looking much taller than her 5'4" frame. "Here's what's going to happen, Albert. You're going to keep your mouth shut about Ryan. You're going to keep giving me money when I need it. And maybe if you're really good, I'll let you stay married to me. And if I don't?" Maya's smile was pure ice. "Then I'll file complaints with the barangay. Domestic violence, emotional abuse, marital rape. Immigration will love that." "How long? Do you think it'll take them to deport you? How would you like to spend your last days in the Philippines in a jail cell?" Albert realized he was shaking, not from fear, but from rage. Pure, clean rage at how stupid he'd been, how easily he'd been played. "You're evil," he whispered. "I'm practical," Maya replied. "You came here looking for a young, beautiful wife who would take care of you forever. I gave you exactly what you wanted. The fact that it wasn't real doesn't change the price." She picked up her purse and headed for the door. "I'm going out." "Don't. Who knows when I'll be back? Order your own dinner." The door slammed behind her, leaving Albert alone with the wreckage of his dreams. Albert spent the next week in a fog of depression and rage. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. Every time he looked around the condo, their condo, he saw reminders of how thoroughly Maya had fooled him. The wedding photos on the wall, the "I love my husband" mug Maya had bought. Him as a joke, the bed where she'd whispered promises she never meant to keep. Maya came and went as she pleased now. Sometimes she'd be gone for days. When she did come home, she acted like nothing had changed. "Good morning, honey," she'd say brightly, making coffee like she was still the loving wife. "Did you sleep well?" The psychological torture was worse than the financial loss. Albert started to wonder if he was losing his mind. His friends back in Michigan noticed the change during their video calls. "You look terrible, Al," his buddy Dave said. "What's going on over there?" Albert couldn't bring himself to explain. The shame was too deep. "How do you tell people that your beautiful young wife never loved you? That everything you bragged about was a lie?" "Just tired," he'd say. "The heat gets to you." But Maya wasn't done with him yet. One evening she came home with a new demand. "Albert, I need $20,000. He looked up from his dinner. Instant noodles since Maya had stopped cooking for him. "For what?" "My cousin wants to start a business. Import, export. Very profitable. I told him you'd invest." Albert almost laughed. "You think I'm stupid?" Maya's expression hardened. "I think you're going to give me the money, unless you want me to make some phone calls." She pulled out her phone and showed him a contact labeled Immigration Officer, Maria Santos. "Funny thing about domestic violence complaints," Maya said casually. "They don't need much evidence, just a scared wife with bruises and a story about her abusive foreign husband." Albert's blood ran cold. "You wouldn't." "Try me." For a moment they stared at each other across the small kitchen. Albert saw his future stretching out in front of him. Years of blackmail, slowly bleeding what was left of his money and dignity until there was nothing left. Unless he did something drastic. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll get you the money." Maya smiled triumphantly. "Smart man. I'll need it by Friday." But Albert had no intention of giving Maya another penny. That night, after she left for another evening with friends, he made a phone call to Carlos, the private investigator. "I need your help," Albert said. "Not to gather evidence this time, I need to disappear." Carlos was quiet for a long moment. "You sure about this? Once you run, you can never come back." Albert looked around the condo one last time. At the wedding, photos and the fake promises and the prison Maya had built around him. "I'm sure," he said. "Get me out of here." The plan was simple. Albert would withdraw what was left of his money from their joint account, about $15,000. Carlos would drive him to the airport at 4 a.m. before Maya came home from wherever she spent her nights. By the time she realized he was gone, Albert would be over the Pacific Ocean. It wasn't justice. Maya would keep the restaurant money, the wedding gifts, everything else she'd taken from him. But sometimes, survival is more important than justice. As Albert packed his single suitcase, the same one he'd arrived with 8 months earlier, he found himself thinking about the Albert who had stepped off that plane full of hope and dreams, that Albert had been naive, maybe even foolish. But he'd also been brave enough to take a chance on love, even at 59 years old. This Albert, the one packing his clothes at 2 a.m. to escape his own wife, was maybe wiser. But he was also broken in ways that might never heal. He left Maya a note on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker where she'd find it in the morning. "Maya, the game is over. Don't try to find me, don't try to contact me. I know what you are and now you know what I am. Someone who refuses to be your victim anymore. Good luck with Ryan. You deserve each other." Albert walked out of the condo at 3:30 a.m., carrying nothing but his suitcase and the painful knowledge that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the person you trust most is the person who destroys you. But as he climbed into Carlos's car and watched Manila disappear in the rearview mirror, Albert felt something he hadn't felt in months. Free. The flight from Manila to Detroit felt like traveling through time. 13 hours in the air to undo 8 months of dreams and disasters. Albert stared out the airplane window as the Philippines disappeared below the clouds. Somewhere down there, Maya was probably waking up to his note. Probably calling Ryan in a panic. Maybe already planning her next move. It didn't matter anymore. Albert was done being her pawn. The passenger next to him was a young Filipino-American guy, maybe 25, with kind eyes and a Michigan State University sweatshirt. "You okay, sir?" the kid asked during the meal service. "You look like you've been through something." Albert almost laughed. "You could say that." "Heading home?" "Yeah." "Finally." The kid nodded like he understood something deeper. The Philippines can be complicated for Americans, especially when it comes to relationships. Albert looked at him more carefully. "You sound like you know something about that. My uncle went through something similar. Different woman, same story. Cost him everything he had. What happened to him? He got out like you're doing, started over at 62. It was hard, but he's happier now. Married a nice lady from his church, someone his own age who actually loves him." The conversation gave Albert hope. Maybe he wasn't the only fool who'd fallen for this kind of scam. Maybe there was life after Maya. When the plane touched down in Detroit, Albert felt like he was waking up from a fever dream. The cold air, the familiar accents, the orderly lines at customs, everything felt real in a way Manila never had. His friend Dave picked him up at the airport, asking no questions when Albert showed up with the same suitcase he'd left with and a face that looked 10 years older. "You can stay with me as long as you need," Dave said as they drove through Albert's old neighborhood. "Sarah's got the guest room ready." Albert's apartment had been rented out while he was gone, but the tenant was moving out at the end of the month. It would be strange living in his old space again, but at least it was his. No joint ownership, no legal complications, no Maya. The first few weeks were rough. Albert would wake up at 3 a.m. forgetting where he was. He'd reach for his phone to check for messages from Maya, then remember that he'd blocked her number and deactivated his Filipino bank accounts. The shame was the hardest part. His family knew something had gone wrong. You don't plan to retire in paradise and come back 8 months later without explanation. But Albert couldn't bring himself to tell the truth, not yet. He told people the culture difference was too much, that he missed American food and American weather. That retirement abroad wasn't for him. Only Dave knew the real story, and only because Albert got drunk one night and told him everything. "Jesus, Al," Dave said after hearing about Maya and Ryan and the fake restaurant. "I'm sorry, man. I knew something was off when you stopped video calling." "I feel so stupid," Albert said. 59 years old and I fell for it like some teenage kid. You fell for what you thought was love. That's not stupid, that's human." Dave was right, but it didn't make the shame any easier to carry. Albert started seeing a therapist, Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a woman in her 50s who specialized in helping people recover from emotional trauma. "What you experienced has a name," she told him during their third session. "It's called a romance scam, and it's more common than you think. The fact that you were legally married makes it more complicated, but the psychological damage is the same." "How do I get over it?" Albert asked. "How do I ever trust anyone again?" "Time," Dr. Martinez said, "and forgiveness. I'll never forgive Maya for what she did to me. I'm not talking about forgiving Maya. I'm talking about forgiving yourself." That hit Albert harder than he expected. He realized he'd been carrying more than anger and shame. He'd been carrying guilt. Guilt for being so desperate for love that he'd ignored obvious warning signs. Guilt for being old and lonely and easy to manipulate. "You were vulnerable," Dr. Martinez said. "That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And the fact that you had the strength to walk away when you realized what was happening, that makes you stronger than you think." Slowly, very slowly, Albert started to heal. He got his old construction job back, part-time. The physical work felt good after months of sitting around Manila. His co-workers welcomed him back with jokes about his vacation that went wrong, but they didn't push for details. Albert started going to church again, not because he'd found religion, but because he needed community. People who knew him before, Maya, who saw him as more than just a victim. 6 months after returning from the Philippines, Albert got a message on Facebook from an account he didn't recognize. The profile picture was a generic sunset photo, but the message made his blood run cold. "Albert, this is Maya. I know you're reading this. I'm pregnant with your child. Send money for the baby, or I'll tell everyone in your hometown what kind." "Oh man, you really are. $500 a month or the whole world finds out." Albert stared at the message for a long time. The old Albert, the one who'd been desperate for Maya's love, might have panicked. Might have sent the money just to make her go away. But this Albert, the one who'd escaped her trap and rebuilt his life, knew better. He screenshotted the message, forwarded it to Carlos in Manila, who confirmed Maya wasn't pregnant and was trying the same scam on 2 other men. And then did something that felt better than anything he'd done in months. He blocked Maya's account and deleted the message. Some ghosts, Albert realized, only have the power you give them. 2 years later, Albert was living in a small house in the suburbs of Detroit. Nothing fancy, but it was his, really truly his. He'd started dating again carefully, a woman named Carol from his church, a widow his own age who understood what it meant to start over later in life. She knew about Maya. Albert had learned to tell his story without shame, and she admired him for surviving it. "You're braver than you know," Carol told him one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset. "A lot of men would never recover from something like that." Albert squeezed her hand. "I almost didn't." But he had recovered mostly. The nightmares had stopped. The shame had faded to a dull ache. The anger had transformed into something more useful, wisdom. Albert started volunteering with a support group for victims of romance scams. Once a month, he'd sit in a circle with other people who'd been fooled by fake love. Men and women, young and old, all united by the experience of having their hearts weaponized against them. The first thing you need to understand, Albert would tell new members, is that it's not your fault. These people are professionals. They study lonely hearts. Like scientists study diseases. They know exactly what to say, when to say it, how to make you feel special. A woman named Patricia, who'd lost $80,000 to a man she met on a dating site, raised her hand. But how could I be so stupid? The signs were all there. Albert nodded. He'd asked himself the same question 1,000 times. Because you wanted to. Believe in love. That's not stupid, that's human. The real tragedy would be if we let them kill that part of us forever. Albert's story started spreading beyond the support group. A local news station did a feature on romance scams, and Albert agreed to be interviewed. His face was blurred, his voice disguised, but his message was clear. Love shouldn't cost you everything you own. Real love doesn't come with a price tag. The CCUS interview went viral. Albert received hundreds of messages from people sharing their own stories. Men who'd lost their life savings to women in other countries. Women who'd been bilked by fake soldiers and fake doctors and fake businessmen. The scope of the problem was staggering. Billions of dollars lost every year to romance scams. Thousands of lives destroyed by fake promises and empty hearts. Albert decided to write a book. Fool's Paradise: How I Lost Everything to Fake Love and Found Myself Again. It wasn't a bestseller, but it reached the people who needed to read it. One review particularly touched him. This book saved my life. I was about to send my retirement fund to a woman in Colombia who I thought loved me. After reading Albert's story, I hired a private investigator instead. Turned out she was married with 3 kids. Thank you for having the courage to share. Your shame so others don't have to live it. Albert kept a copy of that review on his desk. It reminded him that his pain had purpose. 3 years after escaping Manila, Albert got an unexpected email. It was from Carlos, the private investigator who'd helped him escape. Albert, thought you'd want to know, Maya was arrested last week. Immigration fraud, multiple counts. Turns out she was running scams on 6 different foreigners at the same time. She's looking at serious prison time. Ryan too, they got greedy and sloppy. Albert read the email twice, waiting to feel satisfaction. Justice, some sense of vindication. Instead, he just felt sad. Sad for Maya, who'd wasted her intelligence and beauty on hurting people. Sad for all the men she'd fooled. Sad for the culture of poverty and desperation that created predators like her in the first place. But mostly, he felt grateful. Grateful that he'd escaped. Grateful that he'd survived. Grateful that he'd learned to love himself enough to walk away from someone who didn't deserve him. Albert closed his laptop and walked to the kitchen, where Carol was making dinner. She looked up when he entered, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. "How was your day?" she asked, the same question Maya used to ask. But when Carol asked it, Albert knew she actually wanted to hear the answer. "Good," Albert said, kissing her cheek. "Really good." That night, as Albert lay in bed next to Carol, listening to her gentle breathing, he thought about the Albert who'd stepped off that plane in Manila 4 years ago. That Albert had been looking for love in all the wrong places, for all the wrong reasons. He'd thought love was about being needed, about being the hero in someone else's story, about proving he was still worth something despite his age and his loneliness. But real love, Albert had learned, was simpler than that. It was Carol asking about his day and meaning it. It was sharing morning coffee without keeping score of who paid for the groceries. It was being accepted for who he was, not for what he could provide. Albert had found real love, finally. But first, he'd had to learn to love himself enough to demand it. If you're watching this video, maybe you're thinking about finding love overseas. Maybe you're tired of dating in your own country. Maybe you think a younger partner from a different culture will solve your loneliness. I understand that feeling. I live that feeling. But before you book that plane ticket, before you wire that money, before you say I do to someone you've known for 3 months, let me give you some hard-earned advice. First, take your time. Real love doesn't have a deadline. If someone is pushing you to commit quickly, to send money immediately, to make major life changes after a few weeks, that's not love, that's manipulation. Second, protect your assets. Never, ever put property or major investments in someone else's name, no matter how much you trust them. Love doesn't require you to make yourself financially vulnerable. Third, learn the laws. If you're moving to another country, understand the easy legal system. Understand marriage laws, divorce laws, property rights. Ignorance isn't bliss, it's dangerous. Fourth, trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't ignore red flags because you want the fairy tale to be real. Fifth, have an exit plan. Keep enough money in your own name, in your own country to get home if things go wrong. Hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And finally, remember your worth. You don't need to buy love. You don't need to rescue someone to deserve affection. Real love accepts you as you are, not for what you can provide. I lost almost everything chasing a dream that was never real, but I gained something more valuable. The knowledge that I deserve better, that we all deserve better. Don't let desperation make you an easy target. Don't let loneliness make you stupid. And don't let anyone convince you that love requires you to sacrifice your dignity, your security, or your self-respect. Love is supposed to make your life better, not destroy it. If my story saves even one person from making my mistakes, then maybe it was all worth it. Take care of yourselves out there, and remember, real love is worth waiting for.